Thank you for joining us on another episode of Latter-Gay Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Ashworth. Today's podcast episode is brought to you in two formats. We have both a video and an audio version of this episode. If you are listening to us on the audio version through one of the apps like Google Play, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or another, we invite you to subscribe to this channel and also give us a rating. If you are watching this episode in one of our social media channels, like our YouTube channel, Facebook, or directly on our website at lattergaystories.org, we invite you to make some comments below. Share your feelings about today's episode and comment. We would love to create an online interaction and an online discussion about the contents of today's podcast episode. The Latter-Gay Stories podcast is made possible through generous donations by viewers just like you. If you believe in the authentic mission of the Latter-Gay Stories podcast, we invite you to share through donations. There are two simple and easy ways of donating. First, by direct donation through the website at lattergaystories.org and by clicking on the donate link. Another simple and easy way to donate to the podcast is by texting us. You can text the word STORIES, STORIES, to 77948. That's 77948, and texting the word STORIES. You'll be given an opportunity to make a one-time or a monthly donation to the podcast. Your donations go to help us build and create more stories, which essentially helps us to build stronger and greater bridges between the LDS and the LGBT communities. Today's podcast episode features friends that have become very dear to me. A year ago, Paul and Susie Augenstein created a 5th Sunday LGBT Conference in their Riverton, Utah ward. On today's podcast episode, we're going to discuss with the Augensteins exactly what motivated them as straight allies without children who identify along the LGBT spectrum to reach out to their very conservative, older generation Riverton, Utah ward to create a feeling of inclusion within the LGBT community, of the LGBT and LDS communities. The Augensteins really have been an inspiration to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of LDS, LGBT youth. Often the people they reach the most are teens between 18 and 30 years old. But the Augensteins have also been working on an outreach program through Allyship, and we'll discuss that today. So, without further ado, I want to welcome to the podcast Paul and Susie Augenstein. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Kyle.
Happy to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Excited to hear your story because it's unique. I think the one thing that fascinates me the most about the Augenstein story is that you have no intermediate member of your son-daughter family that's gay. So you are, for all intents and purposes, a straight ally family that's reaching into the LGBT community for some unknown reason.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really unique. Often the strongest allies or the most fierce allies in the LGBT community are mothers and fathers of gay or trans children. But your story is completely different than that. And I want to jump into that. I want to talk about what compelled the Augensteins to reach into a world that's often taboo and easily discarded, and why you've made that journey into this space. Remarkably, there are some people in this world that have no idea who the Augensteins are.
Remarkably.
There's a lot of people.
I don't know.
It's probably a good thing.
You almost can't swing a cat in this state without someone saying, "Oh yeah, we know Susie." Not so much you, Paul. I'm sorry.
I kind of stay in the
It
background.
could be for good or evil. I don't know.
So, for those who haven't met the Augensteins before, tell us a little bit about yourself, Paul. Where are you from? What do you do for a living? Where did you meet?
Yeah, totally. I was born in California, born in LA, but raised here in Utah. I've been here for 40 years. Love it here. For a living right now, I'm currently working in the biotechnology industry as a renewal account manager, and I cover the Pacific Northwest for a company out of New Jersey. But I've been in that particular industry for 20 plus years, and it's been good to me and our family. I met my wife in 8th grade in a choir class. And I just knew at that point she was it for me, believe it or not.
Did you meet her because of your vocal abilities? Or
Absolutely not.
It was a requirement,
It was
class.
a required class. She's much more musically talented than I am.
That's not true.
But anyway, yeah, it was we hung around the same group of friends, palled around, not even through junior high, but through high school. Yeah, it was a good thing.
It appears to be a great thing.
A great thing.
Susie, what about you?
I was born in Utah. Like Paul said, we met as young friends. We grew up as friends. I think we've spent our lives growing up together, even in our marriage. We didn't really start dating until late high school or after. And so I kind of spent a few years, he might say leading him on. I would say dating around. But one thing I found interesting though was later in when we were married, I looked at one of my yearbooks, and on a page in the yearbook I found later, it did say, "I'm going to marry you, just you wait." I thought maybe I probably shouldn't have seen that in high school. That was a good thing.
Paul wrote that?
He wrote that in my yearbook.
Good for him.
I know, but thank goodness I didn't see it. I was a little feisty.
Hey, when a guy knows what he wants,
We could call it forced free agency,
we could.
but that's probably a completely different podcast.
Yes.
It would be.
But anyway, so I graduated from BYU. I taught high school health and PE after that, and then we moved to California. We had our children, and then I actually went back to school, 7-8 years ago, and I became a nurse, and that's what I'm currently doing now.
Great. So a year ago, something changed in the Augensteins world that said, we need to reach out to the LGBT community and do something. What happened? What started this?
Well, it was me. I get curious about things, and for some reason, I just became curious about people in our LDS church who had gay children. I just wanted to know about it. It was just an extreme curiosity, and I felt compelled to look up tons of stuff about it. I read stories upon stories daily about it, and I did not know at the time why.
So what did you want? Were you trying to find out if people in the church actually had gay children?
No, I had heard about, actually the first story I heard about a family in Logan, honestly. I don't know how it came up, but I just read that story and I was just like, wow, I wonder how that would feel, to have a gay child, or what the emotions are. And I just felt really prompted to walk in their shoes. And I did that for about a year, a lot. I looked up a lot of stuff. And at the end of that first year, I thought to myself, oh, I missed what Heavenly Father wanted me to do. I'm going to have a gay child. That's what I thought. Like, I have been doing this for an entire year, so maybe I've just been prepared. So then I started going to my kids in funny little ways, and I'd say, hey, do you have any gay friends at school? Or do you think it would be kind of hard for them to go to their parents and talk? I started that way. And then I'd say things like, if you were gay, would you feel comfortable? Like, if you were in that position, would you feel comfortable? Like, do you think I'm someone approachable? Because I'm not always approachable. I can admit that as a parent. Like, I'm kind of a feisty mom. So I just wanted to make sure that was something that they would consider if they wanted to tell me. And they just didn't. They weren't gay. They basically kind of laughed at me every time I asked them. And so then I was kind of going, wow, I just don't understand at this point why I've been on a 2-year journey. And so then there was just a day that I felt kind of a stop. And the feeling that I had was when it stopped was, all right, you've done this much. I need you to wait for a minute. And I literally had that feeling. And then my son was serving, he was going to go to Brazil on a mission, but he was doing a visa wait in California. And he was struggling at the time and actually wanted to come home. And so we had been talking back and forth of the possibility of him coming home. And on that Monday, he had told his mission president, a bunch of his buddies, members and non-members of all of his friends did a fast for him. And he felt these prayers even though he didn't know they were doing a fast. And on Monday, he told his mission president's wife that he had decided to give it a little more time. So we left for Seattle. Was it Seattle? To a soccer tournament for our son. But it was also the week that he thought about coming home. So he was supposed to board the plane on Thursday to go to Brazil. And so I was antsy about that day, hoping he would be okay. And I don't normally answer phone numbers that I don't know, but that day I was going to, because he was on a plane and I knew he would call me from the airport sometime. So I see a number come across and I answer it, and it was the flight attendant from his plane. And when she started talking to me, she just said, I just want you to know that I met your son and his companion, and I just want you to know that they're doing really well. And it was really a pleasure to meet them. And of course, to a mom, that was like, I started crying because I didn't know how he was really doing.
Hello, ma'am, are you still there? Hello?
Yeah,
Hi.
yeah, it was literally like that. And because I started crying, she got kind of emotional with me. She said, my name is Morgan. I just want you to know. She's like, I'm gay. And she just brought it up just as easy as that after I heard her crying. And then she said, you know, I was talking to your son and his companion, and I told him I was gay, and they just looked at me and they said, we love you, sister. And they shook my hand. And so we just became friends. It was like almost like Heavenly Father had put this person for the next part of my journey. And she and her girlfriend lived in Denver at the time. They had gotten married, and we'd been friends this whole time, talking back and forth, never had met. They moved to Utah. Her wife is pregnant with their first baby. And about 2 days before a baby shower, I'd said to her, hey, if you guys ever have a shower, I'd love to come. And she had forgotten. So like a day or two before, she called me and said, oh my gosh, we're having a baby shower. Do you want to come? So
In Denver?
No, here. She'd moved to Salt Lake at this point. So I said yes. And so I got my daughter and we went over. And I had talked to her mom a little bit too. But we walked into this baby shower without meeting anyone. And it was this amazing, cool experience. Like we walk in an entirely big Mormon family celebrating their daughter and their baby that's coming, and her wife. There's church music in the background. And I was like, oh, like I thought it was the craziest thing. I just didn't know that existed. And so I just really felt like that was this next step that I was supposed to go into. So we became really good friends with their family. We had them over for dinner, she and her wife, and they told us all of the story. And it wasn't always as great as we saw it then. So they told us their journey that they had together as a family and where they had gotten to. And it was just the most incredible journey. It was just exactly what I needed to learn at the time. You know, you went to the meeting, right? And you heard them speak.
Right.
And we know that Morgan, like she had tried to commit suicide, and her family had found her, and they had some amazing experiences where even her mom was in the mountains and was trying to contemplate everything, and was told that she needed to come back down and love her daughter. And so I loved the story. I thought, wow, I didn't know this existed and people could be like this. So that's kind of where it did. Then it led me to Encircle.
So before we hit Encircle, Paul, what are you thinking this whole time? My wife is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah, you know, and I think it's actually one of the things that drew me to her. She's always been willing to, I don't know if push the envelope's the right word, as much as really explore unexplored boundaries. She doesn't think within a box. She's always on the exterior of it, probing, inquiring. And as I think many of us will know, it's when you push those boundaries that we grow. And I respect her the 110% for what she does, because honestly, she's taken me places in our 27 years of marriage I would never have gone on my own.
And sometimes hasn't wanted to go.
Exactly. I've been a little reluctant. Not this one, but I've always had to gain the confirmation for myself as to what she is exploring, and it's always come. And this is just one more element to our lives, to our relationship, and to our family, which have allowed us to grow immensely.
I actually forced him one time, and it was way before. I wasn't forced, but I forced the conversation years before and just said, what would we do if one of our child comes out as gay? And we had no reason to even think that, but I just thought it could happen. So what's our reaction going to be?
We have one of the best decorators in the house.
Exactly. That's Paul. Yeah. But yeah, it was just something I just wanted to be ready for different things. You know, we adopted our last two children, and that kind of forced me into some areas of having kids in my life that you don't necessarily exactly know what the outcome is going to be, that are put into your place where you have to take them for where they're at. Completely different genetic pool, and bring them in and figure them out and what's going to be best for them. So I think it just got my mind always kind of thinking.
And I think that's relatable to any child.
Mm-hmm.
You absolutely have to
Absolutely.
just accept what you have and learn to grow and I mean, ultimately, isn't the point of this to be authentic and honest about the journey wherever that takes us?
Absolutely.
Totally.
And move on. So you have a wife that is all over the place, jumping into the LGBT world. Talk a little bit about Encircle. So Encircle is prior to the meeting.
Yeah. So as we were meeting with, like, hanging out with Debbie and Morgan and their family, I had heard about Encircle. I had actually been thinking, is there any place that you can volunteer? And it was within the next week that I saw a thing, I think it was on Facebook or somewhere, where I saw that this place was going to open up. So I was telling Paul about it. I called Morgan and her mom about it. And I said, I think I'm going to go train at this place. So, of course, I pulled Paul with me. And I said, you need to come and train with me. So we went up there, and it was unusual because I felt like that I was a Laurel advisor at the time. I felt like one of my Laurels might be gay. And I got the guts enough to text her mom and ask her if she thought she was. And she just says, I don't know. I've wondered, but I don't know. And I said, well, we're going to go train at this place. And if you'd like, I'll bring you back some information. And she says, no, I think I'll come with you. So the three of us headed down there, which was awesome. We had this amazing training experience. We got to share about us. Stephanie Larson conducted that particular training.
Yeah, so
it was at the beginning.
Let's talk a little bit about Encircle, just for our audience members who have no idea what Encircle is. Encircle is a LGBT resource center located in Provo. It was started by Stephanie Larson in the space that, and this is what shocks me the most about the purpose of Encircle. In 2019, and she opened
2 years ago, that
17.
one.
The Provo House. And if you're unfamiliar with the location, it's just 1 block south of the Provo City Center Temple. The primary purpose of opening that was a resource and support center for LGBT children who had been disowned by their LDS families after they came out. And so there's a large segment of the Encircle population whose families just moved them out of the home literally and said, you're gay, you're trans, we don't essentially know what to deal with you, move on. And they're youth.
Anybody
Young,
from 16 to 25.
Yeah, the primary age that the Encircle House deals with is youth between 12 and 18,
Yeah.
which is unbelievable that in today's day and age, in Mormonville, Utah County, this is happening. The other segment of the Encircle outreach is for those who are looking for connection and a community and a sense of being. And Encircle does an incredible job at providing that. So they're always constantly looking for volunteers. You can look them up at encircletogether.org. So you jump in as a volunteer. All three of you jump in as volunteers.
Yeah. So Paul and I, we went through that training. It was an interesting conversation because, of course, he brought up that he was a bishop and would like to take some of these things that we've learned back into our ward, which creates more conversation because you don't normally get a lot of people in those positions that actually are, I don't think it's a lack of desire. I just think it's,
Well, if you're familiar with the church, you know that you often are just direct line. You're focusing on certain things, and with blinders on, you just deal with whether you're in a young men's presidency, a young women's presidency, a Relief Society leader. That's just what your focus is. And this isn't really the realm that bishops typically serve in.
Yeah.
No, I got a lot of inquiries. What are you doing
on both
here?
sides, like on a word
both
side
sides.
and from other ones saying you shouldn't be a person as a bishop that wants to inquire about this, and so we got it both ways. But our life journey has been more, our backstory kind of leads into a lot of this.
It's always been that way for us.
Yeah, we've had a lot of things that have been outside the box in our relationship with our kids and some of their struggles, and so for us it was just about learning more. We went and we trained, and then the next thing that we did there was go help them put their lawn in, which was really interesting because I didn't know anyone. And they kind of knew a little bit of our story, and we were laying the sod and everything. And of course, they kept asking about Paul being bishop and stuff like that. But I got this little notion. I didn't get to serve a mission for our church, or I didn't choose to serve a mission for our church. And so I thought, I want to be a missionary. And so there was people that kept coming out of the temple. And I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to be a missionary. So I would go over there as they were coming out, and I would say, hey, what do you know about Encircle? And some of them would tell me, and others I would explain to them that it was a house that did this and this. We want to stop the homelessness and suicide of our youth. We want it to be a place where there's no sides, no love. And then I kindly at the end asked them, Well, I thank them for serving in the temple for the dead and ask them if they would like to come serve for the living for the next few hours of their day. And every single person I talked to was awesome. They loved it. Some had to be places, but I got a few of them to go change their clothes. And Stephanie Larson was watching me along with Paul, who always knows that I do weird things. And she's like, what is she doing? And so we have this joke that I've always had with her now because, she talks about me going back and forth and getting temple people to come over. Because I just did not feel any fear about it. It had meant so much to me what I'd learned there that I thought, if people just know, it breaks down barriers if you just know. So I went on a mini mission that day.
So now Encircle has ordinance cards that says as you come in, we'll just check these off.
Yeah. But I was really pleasantly surprised, and older people and younger people alike were very willing to listen. I think we don't give people enough credit as a whole that if they can know better, they can do better.
Which is a phrase we'll talk about a lot today.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you volunteered at Encircle. You come home and you're sitting at home at night and you say, we've got to do something.
We said that a lot, but it came when that talk happened at BYU when we felt very solidified that we were going to go forward.
Talk about that, Paul.
Okay. It was November when we heard that talk from M. Russell Ballard doing a fireside down in Provo, saying that we as Latter-day Saints need to do a better job of understanding our LGBT brothers and sisters.
Clearly, we have not done a good job in the past, he says.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that there's a place for them.
Yep. And so I really had been pondering and mulling that over. And it struck a chord with me. So I took it to my stake president at a bishopric training one night and said, this is something I think that we probably should consider doing as a stake. And he took it, I love our stake president. He's a fantastic man. He took it, mulled it over, came back a few days later and said, you know what, I agree with you. However, we're not going to do it at the stake level. But if you'd like to address it on a ward level, and he talked to all the bishops and said, if you want to do something at a ward level, feel free to do so. It's like, great. And that's where it was birthed.
And it was easy.
Yeah, it was a piece of cake. It took a matter of a few emails, a couple phone calls, and it was set. So
talk to me about the setup. What did the outline, the agenda look like for the 5th Sunday conference?
So we were concerned about how to approach that, and what happened was I think we landed on, we need to understand if we're to be understood, we need to understand first. And so the whole premise of the meeting was to just listen to some of these brothers and sisters who have walked this path and feel what it's like perhaps to walk in their shoes. It wasn't a doctrinal dissertation. It was not a Q&A. It was just a sit back and listen to these stories and feel.
He in fact sent even a letter or
email
I sent an email every person in the ward preparing them for it.
Said, please look up some of these scriptures, ponder them for the week prior, and then come prepared to listen and to feel. And
what were the themes of those scriptures? What were you hoping that your members would grasp?
First and foremost, love. It was really, the two greatest commandments. Love God and love your neighbor. And that judgment is pretty much in their hands. And for us to really truly understand our neighbor and who our neighbors are, we need to listen. And our LGBT community are our neighbors. And I think that bit of the community has completely been misunderstood and not really given the credence it needs within the LDS community.
So where do you start sourcing stories? You said in order to start understanding better and loving better, you need to get into that community. How did you, which stories did you start? Were you looking for a specific story? How did you start meeting the people who would eventually become speakers?
Well, it was just the people that we had met while we were down there. For example, I already knew Debbie and Morgan. So, of course, I loved their story and I knew it needed to be shared. Then we went to a meeting down there where Tom Christofferson was speaking.
And Tom is?
Todd Christofferson's brother.
Okay.
Many people have read his book. So we listened to him speak, and that's where I first met George and Allison. And then I got to know Allison and her story about her son who ended up taking his life a few years prior to that. And I remember one thing that Allison told me was that even though they were really great when he came out and accepting and loving him, that the neighborhood and the ward and the school area was not ready for that, and they were a little bit more fear-based. And she said that so he just didn't have this safe community to fall back on. And when you don't have a safe community to fall back on, there are a lot of dangerous communities that are ready for you to fall into their hands. And that was powerful to me. And that was the day I said, not on my watch. I would never, ever want anyone to feel that on my watch. And so I want to develop a safe community, at least in where I'm at. So I got to know them. Then I got to know Jordan and Amy, who are married, and she's one of the directors of Encircle. And her story was opposite of Morgan's. Rather than having a really embracing family, she had the opposite. And I watched, we'd go on double dates all the time with different people. So we'd go on double dates with them and we got to hear their story. Then I met Kent, another time volunteering there. And so really, truly, it was really organic, huh?
It
How
did.
we met him.
It did, and it happened very quickly. But the whole purpose was we try and encompass the entire spectrum, as much of the spectrum as we could of those who have had experiences within the community. Parents of gay children children who are still active in their faith, active in the church, those who have stepped away from the church, those who have parents have committed the parents of the children who've committed suicide. So we really tried to cover everything so that everyone could get a feel for where we're at on this continuum. And so
we literally sent out a message to all of the 8. Well, there was Ben, Kent, Doysons, and Morgan and Jordan. We sent out a group message one night and just said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Would you mind participating? Could you come up with 15 minutes?
all of them immediately said absolutely.
Yeah. And then that was November, and we let the holidays go by, and January, like a week before, have you been working on your talks? It was that easy. And they're like, yeah. And like, it really didn't take a lot,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that, of course, in our meeting, we can listen to those that are still going to church. But the biggest point that we wanted people that weren't going to church anymore is because it wasn't like these people hated the church. They just felt either a little pushed out or they still wanted a connection. And we wanted our members to understand that just because someone doesn't go to church anymore doesn't mean that they don't miss that connection that they grew up with and felt.
I think that's a good point. It's back to the Elder Ballard point.
Mm-hmm.
We, and maybe not even on purpose, but members of the church, and I hate to use the word ostracize, but that sometimes happens. But Elder Ballard realizes that we must do better because we need to create a place for them in the church.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to let them know that there is a place for LGBT people within the church, which would indicate that there is a feeling of no place.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right. Hence, if it had to be said, then obviously it wasn't the case. So
That's correct.
And you see it all the time. You see people just aching to have that. I mean, Mormons are connected. You can go anywhere in the world and connect with a Mormon. And so when you feel you grow up with that, even if you choose to leave it yourself, you still miss the connection. It's something that's kind of done in your life, and you don't want it. You want to feel still connected and still loved even outside of it.
Yep.
So Sunday morning rolls around. Your speakers are ready. Your stake president's been notified.
Yep.
That we may have a rogue bishop in the Riverton ward.
They never let us know that.
No?
We gave them everything.
Oh yeah.
All the speakers.
We've sent everything on its way, and there were no issues, no hiccups, nothing stopped us. And that morning it was like, all right, here we go.
The only thing that was different is that so many extras that came. We just said it to a few people at game night, because we do game nights, and we said, hey, a lot of you haven't been to church, and we know it's not your most comfortable place to be, but we might have a Sunday you might feel comfortable. So if you want to, come and maybe have a meeting that you feel a little more validated or feel comfortable in, join us. And that's what
Give me the structure of the meeting. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you wanted to go there or not,
absolutely.
but-
Yeah, let's talk about it. I was just going to comment.
go ahead.
I lived 4 hours away and I heard about it. And I drove in because I thought, this is unique. And I mean, full disclosure, I'd left the church. So I thought, super interesting that there's this thing happening. And I would have been even more surprised if it was Utah County, but maybe more liberal Salt Lake area. I get it. But to me, it was fascinating. And so I even loaded up a carload of people and said, if nothing else, you can be my wingman and we can all get out of there at the same time. But we've got to go see this. This is really interesting stuff.
Well, you and 150 extra people. Once word got out that it was happening, it blew up. I mean, I really didn't have any idea as to how this was going to play out. But in any case, I got up, said a few. I mean, and the whole idea was too is we did it in the second and third hour of our block. So immediately after sacrament meeting, I invited the congregation to head back to the cultural hall, and we'd be participating in this meeting. So everybody made their way back there. Everyone sat. I had it in a semicircle, and then I got up and made a few remarks.
Well, you had our entire ward sitting first.
Yeah, I had them sitting in the front,
like they were
and
center,
everybody else filled into the back. I said a few remarks, introduced the individuals. They got up and spoke. We also had a musical number. A couple of our gay friends came and delivered an absolutely stunning hymn that was fantastic. Anyway, 2 hours seemed like 2 minutes. It flew by. And at the end, there wasn't a dry eye. There wasn't a dry eye in that building. And it was one of the most spiritual experiences I think we've had. Especially for a church meeting. And the idea behind the second and third hour was that I felt like for my ward members anyway, at the time, who I had stewardship with, if I invited them to come in an evening or on a weekend or some other time, I wouldn't get those who I felt needed to hear the message. So it was kind of it was a captive audience, right? It was like, come on back here and listen to and just listen.
Forced free agency.
Forced free agency, that's right.
But they cried, and they afterwards, I don't know if you stayed after I came home, but they said for a half hour, people were just going up to the speakers.
It was so...
And we have an older population, huh?
Incredible to see just the emotional connection and the understanding and the comprehension of this community and how they connected with the members of my ward, and vice versa. There really were bridges built that day. And I don't know if I would ever be able to replicate what happened. It was like
there. Heaven rested on it. I felt like there was just this period where there was just complete serendipity.
We had a member of our state presidency there present, and it was fantastic.
He even wanted to write every single speaker. He said, after I want every name, so I want to write them all thank you notes. So it just went flawlessly.
It did.
Which is something that usually doesn't happen after a speaker speaks in a sacrament meeting or a ward event.
Nope.
No.
But I'm sure we'll get to it as well, but the ramifications and implications of what happened that day are still reverberating. It's been amazing.
And where you said, I wanted to see what was going on, in our minds, it didn't feel like I had no idea that after we would be hearing about it. I mean, I knew it was an unusual topic that wasn't, but I knew a lot of firesides that had been done on it. So I didn't really think it was that unusual. I didn't know that my thumbs would hurt for months after, because all I did was get messages from everywhere.
All over the world.
All over the world.
So let's talk about, you brought up ramifications. How was the message received inside your ward? And even in your circle of friends, those who knew the Augensteins, the blowback, what did you get?
There was no blowback. It was 100.
Well, 99.9.
That wasn't. Yeah, it was overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah,
overwhelmingly positive.
Were you shocked that it was?
We've got a great ward. We've got a really experienced and very deep.
We were worried about some of the older people because of the older ideas, but they
embraced it.
They wrote the nicest letters.
Yes, I mean, it was very well received.
What was it that connected with your ward members? Because it's one thing just to go to a meeting and say, "Oh, that was really great. I felt like I learned something that I didn't normally learn," or I felt a little different. But what was it about the conference that they said?
I think for me, like what we did, or like what we said earlier, I think we took, for that 2 hours, we took everybody in our ward and moved them outside the box.
They got to walk in someone's shoes.
They got to grow for that 2 hours. And there was something there that just really connected.
I'll tell you too, what I mostly think it is that they looked at everyone speaking and said, that could be my grandchild. That could be my kid. It wasn't this foreign thing that they kind of distanced themselves with. All of a sudden it became real to them that these are returned missionaries and they are people that just graduated from BYU. And one of the older ladies knew Allison and George and had no idea
Had reconnected
with them and had no idea they had lost their son. And so I think it was just the fact that as much they're all of our kids, you know.
The following week was Fast Sunday. And I think the stake was going to be a little nervous too about what was going to happen in a fast and testimony meeting the following week. So
yeah, if there was anything negative that was going to happen.
You're right. Our stake president came and sat, by me up there. And so we thought, okay, here it comes. I leaned over and laughed and said, okay, we'll see what happens. Nothing.
Oh, it ended beautifully.
It
we had
ended.
A few people that
we had nobody in
it.
our ward got up and talked about it.
Until the end.
They just shared their testimonies of the Savior. It was beautiful. And then one lady got up the last testimony. She got up and she said, last week's meeting changed my life in a sense that I always thought it was them. And I realize now it's me. It was just beautiful. And that was it. It's just been awesome.
So you said you had 0.1% of negativity.
Well, like, for instance, Paul did receive a letter that was unsigned. But to me, when someone doesn't sign a letter, I don't give it that much credit. Because I think if you have an issue, you sign your name. So we're not exactly sure where that came from. It may not have even come from someone in our ward. We also had a particular person on Facebook that kept changing their name and trying to get on. I would block them and was really, we end up finding who the person was, not within our realm of friends or anything, and was really out to get us and thought that we were horrible and that he actually even found Paul's phone number and called him a sheep dressed in wolf's clothing, things like that. But, when you get...
Or a wolf, yeah.
Oh, did I say that totally wrong? I do that. What was it? A wolf dressed in sheep's clothing?
There you go.
Sheep can identify however they want.
Exactly. Let them identify.
That's right.
I do little phrases and I mess them up and they think it's funny.
Yeah, we did. We had a couple people reach out with disapproval. But I'll tell you what, I'll take the 2 versus the last 12 months of tired thumbs and phone calls about encouragement, positivity,
Europe,
and love.
South America, Asia,
Canada.
What are they asking the Augensteins? What do they want to know?
Some were...
How'd you do this?
Well, and oh my gosh, that connected to me. Can that happen here?
Yep.
Or my daughter, right after. My daughter has been on suicide watch and very active parents that lived right by us. A girl in Asia who's like, I'm a returned missionary and nobody can talk about this here. And I feel alone. And this is the first time I haven't felt alone. Everywhere that came out. I think it was just a sense of being validated for the first time in their lives that they could be this strong member of the church and have this side to them that nobody was willing to understand.
To follow a prompting early on in November and see it kind of come to fruition and see the fruits that have evolved have been just remarkable. Incomprehensible almost. It's crazy.
So word travels around and 50 North Temple finds out.
Well, they found out because, honestly, our stake president, I guess the Area 70, I made a mistake that I didn't know I made. I wanted it filmed because I just thought it was such a neat meeting. I didn't realize that you couldn't film it. So, and I get it now because there's legal ramifications for the people that are in the audience, and it's supposed to be, a place for people in church. So it was fine. We didn't release the film and everything. But other than that, we gave them every single thing. We just said to the state president, we're like, here's all the talks word for word. Here's the exact agenda. There was nothing in it that we felt like we had to hide. And really nothing came from that.
Nothing came from it outside of when you
collected. I wrote to President Holland because he had a significant impact on one of my son's lives early in high school, where my son actually wrote him when he was really struggling and he got a letter back. So I thought, he answered my son. So maybe now that I'm pretty sure he knew our name at this point. So I thought, well, before anyone else gets to them, because there was a lot of hype even on the very anti-Mormon place, and I thought, nobody's going to tell the wrong story. There were wrong stories being told that
Lots
I
of
didn't
wrong
want to be
stories.
out there. So I'm like, I'm going to get it out there, the complete truth. So I sent President Elder Holland all of the talks word for word, about a 9-page letter from me, and about 20 full pages of
Front and back
of people that had commented or messaged me since the meeting. Lots of stories. And so I sent it to him, and I just said, I want you guys to have this. And within about 3 days, he got back to me and said that he was leaving his secretary said he was leaving on the tour with President Nelson. That was, when they were doing that world tour. So he asked if we wanted to come up and meet with another general authority. So we did. And it was good.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to go and sit for a couple hours. I got to be super raw. I didn't hold back my feelings about the people that I loved.
What did you talk about? What? I mean, you don't have to disclose everything that was talked about in the meeting, but what was the agenda of that meeting?
The same kind of thing that we're doing here.
He wanted to hear it, to
understand, listen to understand. What did we do? How was it received? What happened?
I think it was more or less even for us to let us talk, because I pretty much got to say, I have a lot of pain in my heart right now. I have people that are hanging by a thread that are good members of this church that we might not get to keep, and just some of my own personal anxieties. I am one that, and I even said this straight to him. I said, I'm a person that loves my faith and loves my Savior, and I study, and I every day of the week I try to draw near to him. And I said, but on that 7th day, I said, I do so good 6 days a week. And when that 7th day comes around, I tend to feel anxious, and I'm more worried that I'm going to go to church and lose my faith than gain it at times. And I said, and I know a lot of members that feel that way. And our church setting should be somewhere where you go and don't feel anxious, where you go and feel like you're accepted for who you are, where you're at. And, and I said, some of us don't feel that way. And he was really good.
Yeah, he's really,
at
really
receiving
nice.
that, he listened. Not much he could do on some of the things, but, he at least listened.
Yeah.
So you leave the headquarters of the church, maybe enabled, emboldened, and you come home. What do you do now? I mean, you've just created. At this point, you probably don't realize the monster you've created.
Oh, no, we didn't.
But what do you begin to do? It's one thing to pull off the show, but then what do you do with the rest of the circus animals?
That was my thing, because I'm always very forward thinking. And I was like, this is going to be like anything else, and it's just going to die down. Like you hear a big thing in the news, and then it's just going to die down. And that really scared me, because I thought, it happens anywhere. You just, you look at 9/11, that is a very big difference of a comparison, but you're very patriotic, you're all in it together, and then real life sets in again, right? So that's when I thought about doing the page on Facebook called Let's Love Better. I thought, you know what? There are a million stories. We just have to circulate them. And the objective has to be the same as our meeting. Can you listen to understand? Can you walk in their shoes? And what can they teach us on what we can do better as members and friends and family for them? So that's when I started that. Plus we started game nights and all of that kind of stuff, because we wanted to keep a community, at least that we knew, safe and feeling loved, and like they had a place to go.
So you're straight, no gay children, gay nephew.
Yeah, he came out later, yep.
But now you're opening your doors, your personal space, to a game night. Why? What was it in that idea of a game night, of all things you could have done, that said, this is a perfect match for us?
Well, that came back to what Allison told me. We had a water slide party the summer before for Encircle, and a few of the guys there, we ended up talking about Settlers of Catan, because it was a game we like, and I just said at that point, let's play it. Let's pick a Sunday and play it. So we did that for a few months, and it was literally the first time it was like 10 people, which now has grown to like 300 on the list. But after I saw that, and for me, I think it was selfish on my part. I had so much fun. Like, I enjoyed them so much. I didn't know I could have these kind of people in my life. And so we just started growing that, and I wanted it to be a place where people, that people felt like they were the only one in so many places. just completely isolated. And this brought them together. And then George and Allison started a dine and dash. So we started corroborating about it. It just brought a place where they could come and feel just completely at ease for a night.
As you know, Susie is a connector. She can bring so many different sides of an issue or a topic and bring it together and make something happen. She is a connector.
Well, I don't have that many talents, but the one thing that I can do, which I didn't realize, because people have been calling me since I had someone call me that knew someone that was going to get kicked out of an apartment, a gay man in Draper, and they said they didn't know me, and they're like, "What should we do?" And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, but let me think about this.
Let me Google it.
And then I remembered I had a friend that was a lawyer and for the ACLU, and I just went and got all of these resources. So basically, I don't know the answers, but I tend to be someone that is willing to find the answers. And I've surrounded myself with enough people that if someone calls and says, you know, my son just came out, or someone's suicidal, I don't have the skills, the toolkits to help all of that, but I can find someone that does, and I'm willing to find it. So I think that's where my role has basically come in, is because I'll find it.
Do you think your occupation as a nurse and a fixer plays into this?
Maybe. One thing I learned in nursing school at the very end was to look at a patient, no matter what they brought to the table, that they were my patient. And it didn't matter if they were strung out on drugs, if they'd just been in jail, or whatever the situation was, that I was to treat them with the utmost care. That was part of the oath that you took at the end. And so, yeah, definitely. I think I have that side that nurtures that way. I also have a side that's, and ask my kids, I was no softie, like as a mom all the time. I'm a driver, you know, so I combine that with kind of being a driver, and I kind of go with those two things. Sometimes they both get me in trouble.
And I just hang on for the ride.
Yeah.
Good luck, Paul. Good luck.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a journey for our kids too, because two of them really didn't get it at the beginning.
That's why I actually want to talk about that. I want to talk about the family reaction. Not only your immediate family, your children, but what about extended family? Parents, siblings?
It was, I mean, for our immediate children, because they were involved the most at the beginning, they didn't know what to think of me. I mean, you have to remember that they've, not necessarily from us, but from around the world, they hear certain things. Plus they have their own phobias because they're straight, you know? And so for two of them, they struggled for a little bit. Josh, who's on a mission now, struggled for a while, but then he started coming to game nights, he and his girlfriend, and they're both right next to each other in their missions right now. And they always sat together at the games, but then by about the third or fourth one, they wanted to sit at separate tables. And Jack and Trevor, who are married, they were so great with Josh. They would sit with him and ask him about his mission all the time. You're going to Poland, it's after he got his call. And I think Josh all of a sudden was like, why am I scared about this? And he even talked about it in his farewell talk, just his crazy mom and then what it did for him. Even on his mission in Poland, he had someone tell him that they were gay. And he told me that. And I said, wow. I said, people don't normally tell you those things in Poland. And he says, I know. And I said, well, I think it's because they felt that you were going to be there for them. You know, they could sense that.
He's like, you have no idea who my mother is.
Yeah. He's got all these companions coming home wanting to come to our house in the summer. And I said, why? What have you been telling him? He's like, I've been telling him all of the LGBTQ stuff. And so, yeah, Marcus struggled. Well, none of them struggled really, but in the sense that they didn't understand. And I remember Marcus coming over to me like a year later and sitting by our pool. And he just said, I'm so sorry, Mom. And I just looked at him and I said, why? I said, when you know better, you do better. I said, I understood where you were at. And I said, but look at where your journey led you to. I just am not too critical about where people have been. It's more important to me where they're heading once they have had something inspire them to do better. And they all did amazing. Yeah. Our extended family,
they've all been great.
They've been great. On Paul's side, lots and lots of
LAs
of support have been created. When my nephew came out, my sister, I was able to kind of walk her through at the beginning. And so by the time Zach came out, our family was just not a big deal. And so that was really good. My brothers hosted events for them up at his home. Yeah. Yeah, our families have been very supportive. Yeah.
So there's a segment of our population of listeners that are in a similar situation, straight or parents of an LGBT child. What advice do you offer someone who is wanting to jump into this world of allyship?
Well, it's interesting because I've seen people that have popped up with this exact same experience as me. And there's a woman that's from Minnesota that just happened to come to our ward one day because she wanted to see what was going on. There's another great lady in Texas, and they're just popping up all over. And they've called us and with that same inspiration, like, what can I do? And basically, I just tell them to start kind of small and then to kind of open up the doors for people. Like, they've, first of all, tried to get to know LGBTQ people in their area. And then they've brought it into lessons, brought it into comments in church. I think if you can start, what do you call it, like warming people up to the idea, then they become more aware of it. I don't know. What do you think?
No, that's right. That's right. Just start small. I mean, don't bite off more than you can chew. But
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 don't be so passionate or even get angry about it, because we're trying to reach people that don't quite understand, and we have to remember that we have to meet them where they're at.
Yep.
Because my passion takes over at times, and I just want to use the fire hose technique, and I have to remember that I've got to meet them where they're at. I even told some of the kids here, they said, oh, those that had parents that were more difficult to come out to, they're like, oh, I wish you could have been my parent so we could have come out to you. And I say, wait a minute, because you need to understand that you've already told me how long it takes for you to come out to yourself, and then it takes your parents. I said, even for me, of course, I have such a better understanding, but I would still have to redirect my thoughts for my child. Like, I've only known my kids with one plan, even if it's only been my plan. It still was my plan, and that's what they seem to follow, because I didn't know what was going inside of them, or I wouldn't have. So you have to give people time to change plans. Redirect.
It's a really great point. I especially like the point about giving parents some time, especially when children come out.
let them process it.
That's something you've had to deal a lot with, and just in terms of hearing the stories, the mostly lows and not many highs about the coming out process. Often the youth that come out have tough experiences with their parents. And I think a really valid point is to understand that some of us have had 2 or 3 decades to try to understand our sexuality. Parents often get 5 to 7 minutes,
Right.
all at once, to try to process and immediately fire hose that information. And their reactions aren't always the easiest and the most appropriate. And sometimes, and this is where I kind of wonder how this even plays into your role as a bishop or any other ecumenical leader in a church. When someone comes out, how best do you prepare for that? How best do you emotionally, spiritually, ready yourself to assist someone who comes out? And did you experience that as a bishop? Were there people in your ward before or after the conference that said, let's talk?
No, that's a good question. I had an individual prior to the meeting, come in and chat with me a little bit about some of those tendencies, and nothing really came to fruition with that. But when somebody comes in before or after at any time, while in that particular office or even out of the office, doesn't matter. If we approach that person with love and understanding and simply try and look at them through God's eyes, it changes our entire perspective. It's not that I don't have an agenda. I'm not there to change them or move them in a certain direction. It's really to just grab their hand and walk with them on that journey. And that's been the most enlightening part about it. And that's what we've had a chance to do a lot of. And whether it was in my office or before or after the meeting or even here, that's been the approach.
I
for
think
me.
we found out after that we have at least 7 families that have a sibling or
A family
child
member
or a
of some
family
sort.
member that is, people just didn't talk about it. And so that gave them a chance to talk about it.
It opened up some doors as far as the communication within our ward and within their families to kind of explore it and go a little deeper.
Yeah, statistically, this is something I ran into early on in this journey, was just understanding statistics. And if you look at a 400-member ward, the number of people directly impacted by the topic of homosexuality, somewhere relating in the LGBT spectrum, is somewhere between 18 and 26 people per ward
Absolutely.
who identify along that spectrum. And then, if you're looking at the law of compounding interest, then you start seeing additional family members, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, sons and daughters.
Yep.
And this topic is bigger than most people realize.
Yeah, and because it's been so misunderstood and not a lot of people have wanted to engage with it, we just kind of set it aside and don't talk about it. And that's been kind of what we've been trying to do, is pull it out from underneath the rug, present it to everybody, say this is something we just can't set aside anymore. We need to talk about it, especially like you said, statistically, it's something we need to have a conversation about.
Especially as Mormons, because we produce a lot of children. So we are going to have LGBTQ children.
After all, it is the straight parents' responsibility. It's their fault that they've
Right.
created gay children.
And yesterday in church, was today Monday, yesterday in church, the mom that I told you about that has the gay daughter in our ward spoke. And she talked about her daughter, and it was so neat to see her journey and the amount, how she felt comfortable now in our ward. And she said that the year that she was praying about her daughter, that the answer that strongly, she said it was written on her heart that God said was, you know what, your daughter was mine before she was yours. And you need to trust me and understand how much I love her and how okay it's all going to be. And it was neat to hear her be able to say that over the pulpit to our members and not have fear in saying it, knowing that she would be well received.
Yep.
How do you address those who say what you're doing is condoning sin, and you're allowing a perpetuation of something that shouldn't be talked about, shouldn't be acknowledged, shouldn't be pushed?
We don't get it very often, but I've gotten it.
I mean, it's even, I can understand people going after Susie. I better understand why people go after the bishop.
Right.
Because isn't his role to lead the flock in righteousness? And what you're doing is promoting sin.
You're right. To some it's a conundrum, but to me it's a no-brainer, because simply leadership comes from love. And if I approach things from that angle, from love your neighbor and then love God, if I am to be more like him and learn to be like him and how he approaches those kids or those children, I'm to do the same. And that's my only concern. I am to love unconditionally. That's my job. That's what I've been asked to do as a disciple of Christ and a member of this church.
And you know what, for us, and maybe it's different, is we've always been a belief very strongly in like the 9th article of faith, which is we don't know everything yet.
Right.
And so we have to leave a lot at God's feet to still reveal to us. So we kind of have that open mindset that there's still a lot to be revealed. And
we have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And again, if somebody wants to come and say I'm condoning sin, or if they want to chastise me in any way for supporting this particular group of individuals, it doesn't faze me whatsoever, in simply knowing that for them anyway, I need to meet them where they're at. And their knowledge, their understanding, their interface and communication with members of that community is probably slim to none. So they're only perpetuating what they know and what they've been told or what they've been taught by other individuals in their lives. So I let time be the leaven for these individuals, and rather than fight, I'll embrace and just understand.
What about you, Susie? Because I would imagine your audience is a little different. Like you said, you are running into the helper audience, the audience that wants to help, that wants to be involved, the parents who had a child that just came out. How do you help them draw that line? Is there even a line, or should there be a line between my faith and the sexuality of my child? How do you help them marry those two worlds together?
Well, I don't think there should be a line at all, but for some, it's a struggle. They feel like their loyalty is being divided, and it's really difficult for some of them. I often, first of all, tell a parent about this little testimony. It's a video that I have. It's a short little testimony where the man said, I think in your final interview with God, he's not going to ask you how many kids stayed in the church or how many did this or how many did this. He says your final interview with God is going to be, Did you love that child in the very specific way that I sent them to you, the way I do? And that was a game changer for me with all the things that my own kids go through. And so I kind of bring that up. The thing that's interesting is watching them progress through that, and how I haven't heard one parent ever say that they would go back to the way they were. That the privilege of having that LGBTQ child in their life has opened them up to a place that they wish everybody could come into.
Yep. The growth was just
so, and I also
unbelievable.
tell them to trust in their child's personal revelations. You know, it's going to be different. You know, we've had people come and talk to us that have had gay children in a very, very loving LDS home, and they say, what do we do about church? And I said, what's more important, for your child to have faith or no faith? And if faith can't be created within the walls of that church building, but they can be created within the walls of your home, then let them step back, because it's not worth losing. It's like Kent said, are you active in church or are you active in your faith? And if something's going to be toxic for them within those walls, then step back, but create it in your home. You don't have to give up on a gospel message in your home of the life of the Savior in your home, you know. And so I don't know, some are on different journeys with that, but I'd say they all come to the same place in the end. Some are really, really scared for people in their ward to know, things like that. But I have seen the most amazing things come around in the end, that I'm kind of jealous of their experiences. I mean, I felt it, but I almost say to everyone, I'm like, you just need to have a gay child. Because if you do, the part of yourself that will open up, I don't think there is a way to become more like our Heavenly Father unless our hearts are broken open and we make a choice. And that's what I always tell them too. I'm like, when you make that choice, and it doesn't come from your bishop, it doesn't come from any side, but when you make that choice, you are becoming one step closer to being more like your Heavenly Father. That's why I love free agency. You know, force makes you do things that you might regret later, or you might be mad that someone made you do it. But free agency, I always compare it to Eve. You know, God said, don't partake, but don't partake. And what he really was saying was like, you know what, if I forced you to do this, Eve, you could come back and tell me I made you do it. I'm sending you out to this world and all this stuff, and you could be really mad at me. But if I figure out a way that she'll make that choice, which she did, because all of a sudden she was like, I get it. I get what this is going to do for me. And then she received the benefits. Same with this. You get a choice to love. If the church today said, hey, everyone, love everyone in the LGBT community, they're in, bring them in, there would be people that never would have made that choice that would do it. They'd bring you brownies. They would tell you that they loved you. But would they? But all the people that made that choice before, because they knew it was the right thing to do, their hearts opened exponentially compared. And I think it's a great kind of testing ground before the Savior comes.
I want to ask specific questions. What advice would you give to an active Latter-day Saint who said, how can I help? What can I do different to help?
We've asked people to come to our events. Yeah. We asked our bishop. He came to a game night. I would say to be aware, and if someone feels comfortable in telling you something, then allow them to have that discussion with you without any buts. Right. Just let them talk.
No judgment, no partiality, just simply open your ears and just listen. Expose your mind to these stories and let them penetrate your mind and your heart and see what it does.
You know, I have
the rest will take care of itself.
A really good example. So we have Jacob Dunn comes to church with us, and he's this beautiful, smart gay man. And he started coming to Sunday school with us, and the old ladies have just loved him. They've taken him away from us.
Jacob's a lady killer.
I know. He doesn't even sit by us anymore. He sits between two old ladies that come, well, they're not that old, but you know. But they love him. And they told me this story when I wasn't in Sunday school, and I was so proud of this whole situation. They were doing a lesson on the family, and there was a quote in it that President Hinckley had made. And Peggy, I think it was Peggy who was teaching, decided to skip it because she didn't want to hurt Jacob's feelings. So they go on and they skip it, and Jacob said, hey, you missed something in the lesson. Why don't we read that? And she was kind of nervous. She didn't want to read it. So she read it, and basically it was a beautiful quote. But back in the day, he said in one line something like, those so-called gays. And afterwards, Jacob came in and she felt bad for reading it. And he says, don't feel bad. He says, I actually really love President Hinckley. I just wish he would have chosen different words. And the way that he did, and they all approached it, it turned into this beautiful discussion. Not necessarily, he came from his time, completely putting him down, but saying, yeah, there was a little bit of something that could have been different about that, the way he came across there. And I thought that was a beautiful way for them to engage in a conversation with him, being like, we love and respect you. We know this could hurt you. And also him coming in and saying, yeah, it actually did. But it doesn't mean I don't like everything that he said, So I just think being respectful, maybe giving someone a chance, invite them for dinner. Some people used to say to us, we'd say, hey, let's go on a double date. And honestly, people in the LGBT community that we said that to thought they didn't believe us. They're like, you don't want to go out with us. And I'm like, actually, we do. You're way fun. Like more fun than most of the double dates we get. And so literally, like when people do that and figure out what people are, how they beat, what makes them them, your whole definition of yourself isn't your sexuality.
Great point. And I had this conversation with the bishop in California just this week, who was focusing on this very topic as well, and saying, all that I'm essentially, when we boiled this whole topic down, he admits all that I'm thinking about is what's happening in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. I'm so worried about the sex life of these two people in my ward that I've failed to forget that the other 99% of their life is mundane things like paying bills and getting along and showing up to church. And I think that's great advice, that we often get just stopped on this idea of the sexuality part of the LGBT topic and how insignificant and often biased that really is.
That was part of Kent's talk. Yeah. Kent did a fantastic job of the ingredients. He put up an ingredients label, and said, so for so many times and for so long, I identified in my ingredients label was, I'm gay.
And then all the
other stuff that was involved. But he got to a point where it was, I'm an artist, I'm an employer, I'm a friend, I'm a brother, I'm I've got talents here, and then, and I'm gay. It's just another smaller part of his entire package that didn't allow us to.
We have to stop worrying. I had a mom tell me this just recently, that with her gay son, that a leader, when the very first question he asked her was, is he keeping his covenants? And she said, they would have never asked me that about any of my straight children. Why do we rush to that with our gay brothers and sisters? And it's a really weird place to go, just to assume that because you're gay that you might not be keeping whatever covenants, or that it's any different than anyone else. You could have someone in your ward, a straight couple that are living together, and nobody would give them that kind of stuff like they would give someone that's gay. So I think we have to stay away from that.
Nor would we excommunicate them for apostasy.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So great advice to the traditional Latter-day Saint family. If you had an audience with the Quorum of the 12, what would you tell them? What advice would you give?
I would ask them to come to a game night. I would ask for them. I mean, we were up in the church office building, and this is no discredit, but when you go up there are people's lives. I mean, there's church music playing in the halls. Everyone's in their suit and ties. And granted, I'm not saying that they're not out in the real world, but I would say that they probably don't have as many opportunities to walk in the trenches, the daily trenches. They might hear about it, but I would ask them to join the trenches, come to one of our parties, come to something and look into the eyes of our parents and these children and just be able to give them something to hang on to. A lot of them feel like they don't have a lot to hang on to. And that's why they leave.
It's great advice.
I actually think some of them in the upper echelons of leadership get it.
I do too.
I really do. I just think that in trying to put myself in their shoes, leading a worldwide church of 16 plus million people, This is a Titanic that doesn't turn on a dime. And if you were to all of a sudden lay this all out there, it might really be more detrimental to the base than it would be.
We kind of believe the base has to get ready.
The base has to get ready. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to invigorate the base. We're grassroots, get out one-to-one, have the conversations and let it build from kind of within. I think that's actually what Salt Lake would like to have happen. Personally, that's my opinion.
We don't know for sure. But really,
Doctrine and Covenants section 133.
Yes, by Paul. We honestly, like, it's really trying to unravel thousands of years of history. You know, I wrote a post talking about that, like, you know, really free agency's really messed us up in some ways, because like with women, men were always physically stronger from the get-go, and so they use their physical strength to be oppressive to women. And that's why we have, you know, just barely coming around where women are getting more rights and having that same standing, because men are all of a sudden like kind of repenting of their poor use of free agency. And you take a marginalized group or a minority, from the very beginning, majorities don't like minorities. They make fun of them. They don't want something that pushes a difference on them. And so you have this group, and you guys from the very beginning were marginalized and kind of put out to pasture. And so really we are undoing thousands of years of poor use of free agency. And I think God's saying, today's the day. Let's turn this ship around that actually you guys all started by not choosing to treat people the way you should have from the beginning. So that goes into our families, our churches, our civilizations, everything. It's a big process to undo it. But I think when a ball starts rolling and it gets momentum, that it happens faster and faster. And I think that's where we're at the beginning of pushing that so that it will start. Because look at our younger generation. They just don't really have any of that prejudice in them.
Much quicker and easier acceptance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the church has been down this road with race. We know that, how challenging it was. But in time, I think time is really the thing that'll help this.
Yeah. We aren't ones that think that our leaders are perfect. And as a Mormons, we should never think our leaders are perfect.
I think that's actually a great point. I attended the B1 presentation during the commemoration of the restoration of the priesthood at the conference center. It was about a year ago.
Yeah, we were there too.
A little less than a year ago. And one comment that President Oakes made has allowed me to draw this connection. And he said, throughout the course of the priesthood ban, I never had a spiritual witness that it was essentially the will of God. And then he brings in President Nelson and President Eyring and say they also were of the same track. They also didn't believe it, which led me to have some issues, because it's one of those do what is right, let the consequence follow. And in their world, they all three believed that the priesthood ban was not warranted, that they didn't have a spiritual confirmation of it, yet
it still existed.
It still existed. And they each had roles in the leadership of the church at promoting or even bringing in change. And so when you say, I believe there are some members of the Quorum of the 12 that get it,
it's frustrating.
It is frustrating because they can openly acknowledge that there really isn't much of a divide between the two communities.
Yeah.
But yet there is a divide, and I completely understand, and I wish there were an answer to your comment about if the church just came out one day and said, it's done and over with, we just love, and there is no divide, what that would do to both communities.
It would be interesting, and I think that there would be a lot of people that, I mean, you take race, and I think it was in our generation where about halfway through our lives, we're like, wait a minute, the things that I have heard are not resonating with me. And just like what this is doing with the next generation with LGBT. And so there just has to come to a point. I mean, I'm not saying you can't blame people, because they do need to start to know better, but you can take, my grandma went to her grave, she, after World War II and the Japanese, like she just couldn't get it out of her head that they were good people, right? And so you have to give some people that chance to either pass on and learn more on the other side because it's so ingrained, or provide them experiences to help them change. they bring a lot of great things to the table. Every generation does, and we have to remember that. But they have to also remember that us coming along are also helping to sort through things that they probably couldn't sort through due to the time they lived in. You know, Brigham Young was a perfect example of that. I mean, he didn't do anything the same as Joseph. Like, he just brought the slaves over, he changed all of that, you know, and I take issue with that sometimes, you know, especially having black children. But, you know, we got through that one probably a little later than we should have, but we got through it.
That's episode 2.
Yep. Yeah, we shouldn't even go there. But so I don't know. I think that in time, I think the best thing for people and with a loving Heavenly Father is that He's more or less wanting us to figure it out individually. You know, I think He would love to come down right now and say, this is enough. I've had it with all of this, and just say, we're done. You guys got to be done with this. But I don't think He necessarily thinks that's the best way for His children to grow, you know, because they're not necessarily choosing it. You know, we can be sheep at times, and we'll do whatever somebody tells us, but it doesn't necessarily cause us to grow in a better way.
I think President Nelson said it in I think the April conference last year, when he said the key for growth is going to be personal revelation, and how necessary that is going to be going forward here in the latter days.
Even if personal revelation doesn't coincide with general revelation?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's why I will never not believe someone that has a feeling of peace and revelation. I've heard it so many times from our LGBTQ kids, and I believe them. I've seen the peace. I've seen that at moments they do have to step away. They do have personal revelation to live happy, productive lives with someone that cares about them, even of their same sex. I don't disregard that. I think that's theirs, and I will honor it, and I will believe them.
I think it's a great point. We have a podcast episode coming up where one of the participants says, during his coming out process, I basically had to look at my kids and say, I think they'd be better off having a gay dad than a dead dad. Like, that was part of his authenticity and honesty, part of that journey where he come to realize that it was more important for him to be authentic and share his story as purely and as honestly as possible.
Absolutely.
Instead of just running from it. And
Best service he could do for his kids and his family.
Absolutely.
And to your point too, a recent General Authority or 70, I don't know if it was in our state conference recently, but somebody had said personal revelation will always trump what we're trying to, what we say.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty
but also
insightful.
He said, but don't, they said that we speak to the majority.
Right.
And we are going to speak to the majority. But if you have a personal revelation that doesn't speak that same way, you have an obligation to honor that as well. And I think that's important.
That's well said.
I even think with my own kids, like, I don't know which of them or if all of them will stay in the church. But more than that, I've told them all, don't let go of the most important aspects that you've learned from the gospel of Christ. Would I like them to stay in, especially now? Heck yeah, because I want them to be advocates.
We need voices.
And we need voices, and I want them to be there for those growing up that may not have those people there for them. But if they stepped away, my biggest fear with them stepping away is stepping away from all of it. And I'd even say that to our LGBT brothers and sisters, you don't have to abandon all of it. You take, it's like sifting. You got your little sifter and you let the stuff go through and you keep the gems. Keep the gems, because there are some good ones that can benefit your lives, but the toxicity, get rid of it.
It's a good point. I think that's the beauty of a buffet. Not everybody loves beef and not everybody loves chicken.
Seafood, yeah.
And that's exactly why it's all offered. There's something there for everyone. Just to wrap up a little bit, so we talked a little bit about Settler Sunday, which is your game night that you host here at your home, where Paul's OCD kicks in. And he has to ensure that all of his Settlers of Catan
and the kids like to knock him over and bug him.
True. I do get a little.
And you start to clean up the kitchen, and everyone watches him clean, and
never have I seen a person more inconvenienced than Paul when someone messes up his game pieces, when they're no longer in a row and his roads aren't straight and his houses aren't all correctly lined up. It's the best
little quirk about him.
Yeah.
So for a family in the Salt Lake Valley, which is where you're located, has a gay son or daughter, trans son or daughter, who is needing a sense of community, what does Settlers do for them? What is your game nights? Or are they even, is it open?
Oh yeah, we get calls. I would say every time we get 5 or 6 new people. And not only new people, but the new people are the ones that stay till midnight or 1 a.m. to talk to you after, because they kind of don't believe this exists, and they kind of don't believe that still that we would want them, you know. So yeah, they come in, and I think what it does for them is it just helps to actually relax them. We have amazing people here. You know, a lot of them that just completely embrace someone that's coming in that's new. We even have our own ministering group. After they put out the thing, we had a few that just said, let's start our own ministering. And the second they hear about someone that's struggling, I've never seen people act faster than our gay brothers and sisters.
So, and you're talking about the LDS Church's home-based church idea. So, I mean, obviously you haven't created your own religion, but what are you doing to connect the LGBT people with a spiritual opportunity?
Well, like they've taken that on themselves because, like I said, most of them know the drill. They love the home teaching, they love their mission, stuff like that. And so they just took that concept and just use it with each other. We did start an LGBTQ Sunday school class, and that fit in perfectly with what the church is doing now because they encourage, you know, your own group studies and stuff like that. But this class is a little bit different. The concepts do come from the life of Christ and his characteristics, but can be taught in any way they feel comfortable. Many use the scriptures, many use inspirational talks like Brene Brown or things like that, and they come together because they miss the connection. They really liked church.
They want to foster their faith.
And
they really
so
do.
We have people, the majority don't go to a church, but some do. And there are believers and there's non-believers. The non-believers actually show up the most, which is, I always think it's awesome because they add so much to the table. I think they believe more than they think sometimes. And it's just, I mean, what group of people, even in the church, I'm going to do a little comparison. Can you have 25 people that want to teach, that are excited to teach, that are begging to teach when someone can't come, and that provide a lesson that can last an hour and a half and have people completely engaged? Sometimes 3 scriptures. Sarah gave one on the Beatitudes. We went over 3 scriptures, half hour each. It's really impressive. It's like a highlight of my Sunday. And it gives them a chance to come and have those discussions in those moments and some raw times. It allows for them to say, you know, this is where I've been hurt a little bit. You know, it's been beautiful.
It's a nice melding of faith and community.
Yeah, and they need a place.
Otherwise hasn't happened like we'd like it to.
So how do we connect with that, with the Settler Sunday and the Sunday school? Mostly people that just get a hold of me will say, hey, my son or daughter, or I have a friend. And then we just have Facebook pages that we add them to. So that, I mean, for some of them, a big gathering is overwhelming. And so some have said, we really like smaller things. So we made a book club. And we made a cooking club, and one meets on the first Monday. And the beauty of it is it's like people think, oh, how are you doing it all? I'm not. I'm like a facilitator, you know, but we have about 10 families that say, please let them come to my house for cooking club or my house for book club. Everyone wants to do it. They all want to be a part. Once you're with the kids, you want to be a part of them. And I've noticed we're talking from Davis County, North Salt Lake, all the way down to Utah County.
Yep.
Oh, absolutely.
There are families all over the valley who are hosting.
Yep.
Yeah, and our last cooking club, our first one that happened was Steve's mom, and she had a blast teaching them. Our book club was here on the first time, and I don't think it will be back here the rest of the year because there's different families covering it. So we had a great time. There was 4 girls, 4 guys, and we got to have a little bit more intimate conversation. And so it was nice because the ones that don't normally come to big things were really grateful to have.
Well, that's
something.
What happens when you choose 50 Shades as your book of the
That's right. That's right. The books are
no. And actually, that's another good thing is that they decide the books, and so, of course, because of what they've been through, they pick the most like introspective books to talk about. You know, I mean, we're reading one about a guy that was convicted of rape and murder that didn't actually do it and spent 30 years in jail, and his story. So it's really interesting.
redemption.
Yeah,
mercy.
redemption. Yeah. So
Great insight.
there's a lot of really great things, and I'm really glad that we can be a part of providing it for a group that felt very lonely. I almost get jealous for straight people now because they have nothing that's as cool as this that brings in this kind of community, in my opinion.
We'll call it holy envy.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes.
I am just thrilled with the participation and success of the Sunday school program on every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And every Sunday there are 25, 30, 40 people, sometimes 50 people every Sunday who show up and participate and just love to feed their spirit.
Yeah.
Where they don't feel like they can in their own traditional ward.
And to be honest, some of them, like even yesterday, one of them, they were talking about radical inclusivity and making simple is powerful. That was kind of the theme. And, they were honest. Like some of them said, you know what? In our own community, I have people saying that I can't like the church at all. There's breakoffs in every community where you're kind of tough on each other. It's not just LDS, you can even have it. And we were sorting through some of those things so that, and everyone in the group was saying, yeah, you don't have to feel exactly like I feel about things. That's what I love about them. They let people be where they're at in that class, especially.
Let's talk about, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if we don't want to keep them in our Sunday school,
we wish they could go
back. Take it back to your wards. Try and, have this free and open conversation, discussion with members of your ward. That's ideally where
I think
we'd
it's
love
a
it to take
bridge
place.
until our wards can give that inclusivity to the way that it's needed. So it shouldn't be for like cement and stone. It should be a temporary thing as we're preparing our wards and other places to be better at bringing them in. But they need it, so we're going to do it.
And they want it.
Which is a great tie into another Facebook group that you run, the Let's Love Better.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
So that's the page I said about earlier where we put stories, in fact, and I'm always asking for them, and I haven't run dry yet in over a year, but it's stories of either parents or our LGBT brothers and sisters, their journey. And basically, it can be really raw, and some of them are, but it always turns around to what happened that was great for them in their faith and what happened for them that was harmful to them, and how can we change that. And truly, I think those stories have brought more people. I mean, really, it started with no one, and there's about 1,500 followers now. But, I will have some that like 6,000 different people will have viewed. And it always branches somewhere to another family, to another member. It just is another place I think we can go to learn.
She connects.
Which I think is really fascinating when, in the beginning of this podcast, where we talked about the beginning of the Augenstein journey, was with stories, looking for other families, with a family in Logan, and that story resonated. Mm-hmm. And here we are in a chain of events, 2+ years later, where you've got a movement. You have something going on that's unique, but absolutely a situation that can be replicated.
We hope.
This is what I was telling you about earlier, and this is the part and this is kind of a sacred part of my life. And it's how I have interpreted this. In my Patriarchal Blessing, the very, very first paragraph, like the first 4 lines, it was very unusual, and I kind of made fun of it most of my life until I understood it. But it said, Susie, in the pre-earth life, you walked and talked with some of the great ones about your special mission that you would have on the earth. Now, I'm going to tell you what I did with that for the first 30 years. I thought it was really silly, and I would put these projections into it like, maybe I'm not the biggest Brigham Young fan, but I do appreciate some of the things he did. But I kept thinking, great ones. Does that mean I was talking to Brigham or someone? I didn't really think that we would probably get along that well. And so I kind of shelved it and thought that's just a weird line. But then a year and a half to 2 years ago, I am telling you, the hair stood on the back of my neck when I started meeting the great ones. I met Richard Osler. I met the Doysons. I met Stephanie Larson. I met you. Yeah. I met parents. I met kids. And every time I met someone, I was like, I'm meeting another great one.
Noble and great ones.
I really felt like it all came together 30 years later where I was like, we did talk about this. This was something we talked about that we knew was going to happen during our lifetime, and that we get to participate in not this radical movement, but I would say radical in the movement of love, We get to push forward a different way of looking at what we once thought was a problem that really isn't a problem. It's going to take time, but it's such a privilege. And there might be people that say, no, it can't mean that, really, but it does mean that. And if I'm going to accept other people's interpretation of what they have, their personal revelation, that's my interpretation, and I stand behind it.
At this point, I'm completely comfortable with your personal revelation.
So am I.
I think your personal revelation has impacted the lives of... I rarely use the word revolution, but I really believe you've created a revolution. You've created something that is unique. I look at the LGBT community 1 year ago and then look at it today. It's polar opposite. What you've done for the LGBT community in this valley alone is game changing. The amount of connection and President Hinckley's biography, Sherry Dew says adulation is poison. He didn't like the idea of a biography because it only talked about the great things that President Hinckley did. But I think there's absolutely an opportunity to say congratulations and thank you for what the Augensteins have done for the community, because I think it takes a village to raise a child. It takes many people to move this forward. So I'm excited to be just on the coattails, just watching what the Augensteins are doing.
I say we're just small cogs in this wheel, but it's all of these noble and great ones that are doing the heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
They're moving it forward.
It's such a privilege. I look at it and think, my life is so wonderful because of all of this.
So much more enriched. And this is not about us.
I don't even want to, people think, let's die and get to a better place. And I think this is really great. I really, really am enjoying my time on earth. Sometimes I wonder if it will get better. And I know that's weird because we live in a fallen world, but I can't imagine that this isn't exactly to me what my heaven will feel like. It's a blessing.
Well, you'll be here forever.
You'll walk the earth.
I'm a third Nephite.
The fourth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fourth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for thank you for what you've done and for joining the Latter Gay Stories podcast to share your story. Any last final parting words?
Go ahead. I talk too much.
No, I think that I pretty much summed it up. We're just extremely fortunate and grateful that we've been able to go on this journey. Because like I said, our faith in this box, we've been able to pull the lid off and let it really flow. And our faith has grown. Our relationship with our Savior has grown. The community has grown. We just are so blessed.
We are a human family.
Well, we're excited to call you mom and dad, brother, sister. We call you a lot of other things.
Yeah.
That
I've been called a lot of things.
Yeah, some not always so good, but yeah, we can deal with that.
It's all good.
Thank you again.
Yep. No, thank you.
I think sharing your story gives people an extra ounce of hope, but maybe some inspiration as well to do other things in their communities. And I hope that other bishops and stake presidents out there see and hear your experience and story and say, probably wasn't as maybe an Elder Packer experience where the candle of the Lord, you have to venture down to the darkness, through the darkness for a couple steps to find that the way is lighted ahead, that it wasn't as bad as you thought it was, that the repercussions weren't as extreme as you had perceived them to be. And I think that is the reality. I've spent a lot of my advocacy time with the LGBT LDS community finding the very same result, that it turned out okay.
Yep.
And that there wasn't blowback and there wasn't this fierce animosity, that there were more stories of love and inclusion than there were separation and anxiety and disdain for the communities.
If
Absolutely.
people can learn to live in ambiguity a little bit, like my biggest prayer I've ever said to Heavenly Father really earnestly one night was, I was really tired that night. And I said, Heavenly Father, is the rest of my life going to be just ambiguous? And I got a resounding yes. And then after that I said, and is it going to be okay? And I got a resounding yes. So I think if you can learn to walk through those ambiguous moments and know that Heavenly Father does have our back, He does see the big picture, it's going to be okay.
It's great.
And to your point, Kyle, just briefly, I think you said hope. And while I was a bishop, I remember a year and a half into my ministry, I didn't know if I was going to make a difference. I had no idea if I was doing any good. What is my purpose? I had somebody leave my office and I just said, I don't think I did a hill of beans for them. And I sat down and I thought to myself, what's my role? What's my purpose? And you nailed it. It was a resounding, you need to provide hope. Give people hope, because hope is a wonderful thing. And hope in the Savior, hope in mankind, hope in one another. You know, it moves mountains. That's the miracle. So if we can provide a little bit of hope, we're good with that.
I'll take it. And living in Utah the last week, a little less mountain moving with all the
yeah, the earthquake.
Touche.
with a few earthquakes.
Exactly.
Thanks again.
No, thank you.
You've opened your home and a personal part of your journey that most people don't get to hear and understand, and I am absolutely appreciative that you were willing to do that.
It's been our pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Latter-Gay Stories podcast. Again, I want to thank you, Paul and Susie, for giving us the opportunity to come into your home and share in your story. Thank you for what you're doing for the LGBT community. Earlier in this episode, we mentioned the 5th Sunday LGBT Conference that the Augensteins held in their Riverton, Utah ward. I thought it appropriate that I create a link on our website at lattergaystories.org and also on our Facebook page. If you're watching this version of the video version of this podcast, right below here on the Facebook page, I will link a transcript of all 5 talks that were given at the Augensteins 5th Sunday LGBT Conference in their ward. I think it will be a good opportunity for you to read and understand the stories that were presented in that conference. They're powerful, and they're not traditional talks that you will hear in a normal LDS ward. And because of that, I think it might inspire you to reach out to your ward councils, your bishops, stake presidents, and invite them to also hold a similar meeting in their ward house. Also, I want to invite you to the Latter-Gay Stories website. On the website, we've created a resource tab for bishops, stake presidents, branch presidents, and other ecclesiastical leaders, mainly in the LDS faith, to hold an LGBT discussion in their wards, branches, and units. There, under the resource tab, if you click on church leaders, you will find a resource manual that has been created specifically and exclusively for the LDS community, using links directly through LDS.org to help create a discussion and a dialogue concerning an LGBT discussion. Also, with the church moving to focus on a home-centered church program, we've also created, under that same resource tab, a home and family guide, which gives you an opportunity to have an LGBT discussion around the kitchen table. Both the Church Leader Guide and the LGBT Home and Family Guide are available for free online at the website at lattergaystories.org. In addition to those resources, there are a variety of articles, including one written by Tom Christofferson, directly answering questions from church leaders as to how to understand and better associate with LGBT members within wards and branches. I invite you to study that resource as well. All of those are found at the Latter-Gay Stories website at lattergaystories.org and under the Resources tab. Again, thank you for joining us on this episode of Latter-Gay Stories podcast. This is an opportunity for us to better understand the intersection of sexuality and reality, but most importantly, I want you to become a better person, to find a greater level of authenticity and honesty. It's because of stories just like this that you are able to continue your Latter-Gay story.